Here we are, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. It is Gettysburg 161. We're here on Oak Hill, and we're gonna continue to try to show you as much of the battlefield as possible. Somewhere in the distance, somewhere up close, we're gonna try to show it to you. We encourage you to watch our previous Gettysburg anniversary coverage so you can understand a lot of these places in depth, but we're gonna be doing some walking here and just showing you bits, getting you up close with the battlefield here. I'm Gary Edelman. We got Chris White behind the camera. We're here with Sarah K. Byerly. We have a guest we'll bring on in a moment, and I think you're going to enjoy this particular guest. But before we get moving and turn it over, right behind me over here, you're seeing off in the distance there, you're basically seeing Reynolds Herbst McPherson's Woods. We've already shot over in there. That's where General Reynolds is killed. That's where the Iron Brigade fights. And as you move toward the center over there, you're seeing what we call the ripple on an early video. That's the ridge between McPherson's Ridge and Seminary Ridge. And you might be catching some of Oak Ridge. That's the woods that are closer, with Oak Ridge actually extending into Seminary Ridge beyond. I think you're going to see the Peace Light Memorial off to your left, but we're going to talk about that separately. With no further ado, we're going to start walking now. Let me bring on my good friend here, Colonel, Licensed Battlefield Guide, U.S. Army War College, Doug Dowds. I have an important question for you. How's the weather today?
The weather is spectacular.
This, for an anniversary, this
I've
is
never
about the
seen it
best.
better. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. That's
Indeed.
exactly right.
Well, what do you got to say, man?
Honor to be here. First of all, thanks for everybody for showing up. Hey, we're on Oak Hill. Hey, one of the things we should start with are two unique artillery pieces there. These are Whitworth cannon or Whitworth rifled guns, unique on the battlefield in the sense that we often talk about the Civil War as the last of the old wars and the first of the new. Notice the breech loading mechanism here in the back. Oh, by the way, Joseph Whitworth makes his money by being a master manufacturer. We would call him today a Lean Six Sigma guy. He comes up with standardization and precision, and effectively what he does is come up with a hexagonal shaped barrel with a round that fits the shape of the barrel so that it has less than 1% escapage of the gas, or leakage as they would call it, which means at 35 degrees of elevation this can shoot over 5 miles. 5 miles. That is something that we would expect to see as we approach the next war. Now, the fact is, they don't bring the carriages here to Gettysburg. They don't get all the extra parts. If you think about it, it's a unique set of drill. So they never get the full use of that 5 miles. Of course, we'd have to create a new occupational specialty like a spotter. We'd have to have communications to radio that back. And we'd have to have a more efficient set of making micro adjustments to how they shoot the range. So ultimately, they use that cannon just like they do all the other as a direct fire weapon. Now, as we walk past, we're also going to walk past some Confederate Napoleons. You can see it doesn't have the swell at the end of the barrel. It becomes interesting for us as we study Robert E. Lee here in the Army of Northern Virginia. They're going to bring almost 275 pieces of artillery here. Remember, 9.5 months ago, while we're at Antietam, Lee is terribly outgunned. Remember, he has 45 6-pounders, which are obsolete at that point. He has another 36 12-pound howitzers, also obsolete. And what he does is he sends all those 6-pounders back to Richmond, has them melted down, and the Tredegar Iron Works is going to produce 50 12-pound Napoleons, of which Lee is going to bring 47 of them north. This is how he's going to achieve some degree of firepower parity with the Army of the Potomac. As we continue to the south, as we continue down the Oak Hill here, we're going to pass the Eternal Peace Light Memorial, dedicated in 1938. It's the last great reunion of Civil War veterans. Imagine almost 1,900 veterans are here in 1938. Average age is about 95. The accounts vary, but they talk about these fields. You could see somewhere between, well, some people say 50, some people say 100,000 people. Other people would suggest there's 100,000 people stuck on the small back roads of Pennsylvania trying to get here. What they're coming to see is the dedication of this monument, and to listen to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt dedicate it. If you take a hard look at it, notice the darker stone on the bottom. That's Maine granite. Notice the lighter stone on the top. That's Alabama limestone. Truly, North and South coming together in a single monument. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt would end his remarks by honoring both Confederate and Union veterans and saying he's thankful that they stand under one flag today, ironically only 3 years before the nation united would fight in World War II.
And let me just say, first of all, Doug is off to the races, man. He is ready to go. We hope you're enjoying here. We hope you'll share this with your friends. And I already see a bunch of people watching. We're over 115 already. We got Vermont, we've got Scotland, we've got someone coming from the Santa, that is spelled like it might be in the movie, Massachusetts, Indiana, Switzerland. We really appreciate all y'all joining. I'll just add one thing onto what Doug was saying there, and that is that it was a really hot weekend in 1938, and about 1,800, 2,000 veterans came here, and they were aging. Like the World War II veterans, there weren't as many left at that point, and the people who planned the dedication of the event expected a lot of death among the veterans who came, and they were happy that only 7 died when they came to see this dedication. These guys, their average age was 94, and back then that was especially old. For any of you 94-year-olds out there, that was a different story back in the 1930s. So they were happy and satisfied with this. By the way, there was a sodium vapor light up there during the gas crunch in the 70s, but since 1988, when it was relit, it's been burning continuously to symbolize peace eternal in a nation united.
In fact, I went back and found one young man. Here's William Catton. He was 13 years old when cavalry passed through his town in Sturgeon, Missouri. Boy, he sure did like those uniforms that those cavalrymen were wearing. And so what he did is he followed the unit. And the next morning when they woke up, the boy was in their camp. And he goes, "I'd like to join." And they go, "You need to go back home." And they'd move on, and the next day the kid was there again. And so finally what the colonel does is offer, if you learn to play one song in one day on a bugle, you can stay. And he does. And so you can see there he is as a 13-year-old. They issue him a sword. It's almost bigger than he was. He's going to fight with them all the way to 1865. They're going to serve in Arkansas and Missouri and even Georgia before the war's over. He's going to come back here in 1938, and that's him. Now at the end of his time, but that's him with his son, who he named after his commander during the Civil War. So we kind of get the beginning and the end of that journey.
Let me, Doug, real quick before I hand my mic off, say 2 things. First of all, the McPherson barn is going to come into view beyond these woods in a little bit. So as we're looking this way, you're going to see it come into view from behind those woods. 9/10 of a mile away will be the McPherson barn when you start seeing it. Another thing I wanted to say before I hand my mic off real quick is, you know, here we are going back to 1938, right, to the reunion here. You have Civil War veterans here in 1938. Some of them lived into the 1940s. These are Civil War veterans who had already experienced a world war. On that day, there were planes flying overhead, there were tanks going around. Civil War veterans saw color TV. Civil War veterans saw world wars. It just wasn't that long ago. I only missed the last Civil War veteran, Doug and I both, by about 11 years or 12 years. So, you know, I've shook the hand of a lot of people who met people in the Civil War, and that's our job, right, Doug? Drag the past forward?
No, it's so true, and it reminds us that we're all stewards of this great experiment. You know, the founding fathers, that was the greatest generation to this generation. And then, of course, this generation was the greatest generation to the ones that we said were the greatest generation in World War II. And interestingly enough, Abraham Lincoln says 4 as he goes back to the Revolution. Well, gang, we are 80 years from World War II to today. So it seems we're due another greatest generation. And we see that connection here. Good. Now, we would be mistaken if we didn't talk about Oak Hill. Remember to pick up from our battle this morning. Time now about noon, when the next Confederate Corps is going to show up here, commanded by Richard Stoddard Ewell, a new Corps commander, always Jackson's best division commander, and said, hey, look, if ever I get killed, he should replace me. Now, unfortunately, he gets wounded at Brower's Farm, Second Bull Run. He goes back to Richmond, has to have his leg amputated, but while he's recovering, he meets his wife, so fair trade. Now, when Jackson gets killed, he picks up Jackson's corps. He's going to lead Lee's invasion on the other side of South Mountain, which ironically enough is why the Confederates are coming from the north to get on this battlefield. Now, we know Ewell gets an order on the 29th to concentrate at Gettysburg. That has come together, but don't bring on a general engagement. He won't start marching until the 30th. And Ewell doesn't get much credit on this battlefield, but we should give him some. Think about it, on the 30th, he's going to cover 22 miles, which is just going to put him just north of town. So that on the afternoon of July 1st, when he shows up outside that tree line, he is now going to be on the flank and on high ground of all the Union soldiers he sees. That seems pretty Jackson-esque. Now, right about the time he's going, it doesn't get any better than this. He remembers Lee's orders to concentrate, but don't bring on a battle. And there it is in the dilemma. Now, ultimately, if we think about the way that Robert E. Lee puts his fingerprint on the Army of Northern Virginia, what he's done is promote very aggressive commanders. He knows Lee cannot be everywhere. He also knows that windows of opportunity are few and fleeting, and they're only open for a short amount of time. So promoting aggressive commanders means that the Army of Northern Virginia, that's always outnumbered and always outgunned, will jump through those windows of opportunity when that time comes. Chris?
Yeah, I can't agree with Doug more that Richard Ewell does not get enough credit for this battlefield. Let's cut across here, Sarah. We're dealing with cars, we're dealing with traffic and terrain right now. So as we go across here, let me just touch on a little bit more what Doug said. Richard Ewell marches to the sounds of the guns on the morning of July 1st, 1863. He had discretionary orders to move to Gettysburg or to Cashtown. He moves into this area and then starts cutting cross country to get up onto this hillside. And this is known as Oak Hill. As we're on top of Oak Hill, he is going to bring his 8,500 man division commanded by Robert Rhodes, a Norse god clad in Confederate gray, according to Douglas Southall Freeman. And he is going to bring that largest division of Lee's army right up behind us. This is looking towards the north. Back up in that area would be Biglersville, then beyond Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania. But over off to my right, out to the west, is coming in the Confederate 3rd Army Corps, as well as another piece of Ewell's Corps. Only 2/3 of his corps is coming down from the north. Another piece of it's coming down the Chambersburg Pike, modern-day Route 30. And we'll notice that there's going to be a change in our terrain as we rotate around here. It's almost like ripples in the ground. You'll have Whistler's Ridge, Hare's Ridge, leading down to McPherson's Ridge, to Seminary Ridge, and that is going to be speed bumps for the delaying action set up by John Buford on the morning of July 1st. So we're dealing with some different terrain over here for the Confederate 3rd Army Corps, who brought on a general engagement against orders. So if you want to bust on anyone for this battle, go against A.P. Hill. Richard Ewell was coming down here to the sounds of the guns, doing exactly what he needed to do. A.P. Hill bumps into an entire Union Corps, kind of tells Robert E. Lee, I don't know what's ahead of me, and leaves it to Lee to fix this situation a little bit later on. But as we look down towards the south, we're looking towards the town of Gettysburg, which would not have come this far north in 1863, a town of 2,400 people. You're looking off towards what would have been known as Pennsylvania College. Today, that's Gettysburg College, and you're looking off towards the sports fields that were not there. But beyond, you may be able to pick up some steeples and then maybe make out in the far distance a green water tower, and that's East Cemetery Hill. That will be the Alamo position for the Union Army here, because as the Federals push men out to my left, they're also going to come across this plain to my east, off to my right. They will have a fallback position on the south side of the town. That'll be one division commanded by a guy named Steinwehr. So if everything falls back from this position here, if all the Confederates start coming in like they are, like closing a fist, think about the Federals in the middle and Confederates coming in from all sides, or closing an umbrella, they're coming down in that direction. As that is happening, they have that fallback position. But before I let Gary come back on here for a moment, over here on this Gettysburg Plain, what you're looking at is a flat plain, a hilltop over here, rippling ridges. And then if you've ever been to the south and check out our videos from tomorrow, you're dealing with rocks, ridges, high hills. The topography and the terrain on the Gettysburg battlefield changes dramatically. And Oak Hill is a dominating Confederate artillery position overlooking that plain, overlooking the McPherson Ridge. That means they're in a perfect position, as the Confederates always seem to, by dumb luck, find these perfect artillery positions. Places like Nicodemus Heights at Antietam, Maurice Heights at Fredericksburg, Hazel Grove at Chancellorsville. Now July 1st, everything's coming up, most everything's coming up aces right now for Robert E. Lee, though that's soon about to change.
Good, good. Thanks so much, Chris. I said Doug was out of the gate. Maybe Chris is out of the gate as well. Somebody on here agreed. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We have more than 250 people watching. Let's walk over to these guns while we're waiting a little bit, while I go through some of this just to show you a little bit more of the battlefield. When you come to Oak Hill, come down here and enjoy that view that we just showed you over toward the town, because, man, there's hardly a better spot to understand the first day than from here. We've got new Trust member Nathan with us. We've got, I hope, Cream de Mint Wolfer still watching as well. We got Pittsburgh watching. Chris, I guess everybody comes. And hello from Minnesota and a bunch of other places. Please share this with your friends as we go along. Just real quick before I hand it back. You know, this view that Chris was talking about, from here you can see Barlow's Knoll off to the camera's left, off in that's his distance. You can't specifically zoom in, but just below the radio tower there. You can look over, we already showed you McPherson's Ridge over there. You can see the Confederate pinchers coming on both sides of the Union and see exactly where the Union had to go, back to the high ground, Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill to the left of it. So I just wanted to jump on to mention that before we start walking again.
Yeah, and I'm going to bring Doug back on here, but I want you to imagine right now, and you can pull up our American Battlefield Trust maps to get a better idea of this, but we have about 7,000 to 8,000 Union soldiers starting to come out onto that plain. We have Union soldiers, about 8,000 or so, kind of tucked in around a woodlot and then spread out into an open area. But what the Confederates can't see is the wood plot that we're about to walk towards, and that is Oak Ridge, which is kind of ironic. It's the closest position, but the Federals are going to use cover and concealment down there to hide their position until the right moment to strike. because this is where the lack of Confederate intelligence, meaning horsemen out here gathering intelligence for Robert E. Lee's army, is going to come back to bite them.
Yeah, it's a great point, Chris. So let's catch up with how we're fighting this out. So you imagine when Ewell comes out here, he's had this discretionary order, or at least told not to bring on a general engagement. But ultimately, if we read his report, he would say, seeing those men trickling out from town and believing they were going to attack me, I decided to attack vigorously. And so, as Chris talked about, Ewell is with the largest division in Lee's army, commanded by his only non-West Point educated division commander, Robert Emmett Rhodes. Now, the first thing he's going to do is stack his artillery up on Oak Hill. 2 of those batteries under Carter's battalion is going to fire south. He's going to make life miserable for all those troops we saw earlier down by the McPherson Barn and McPherson Ridge. That's going to bring a fair amount of counter battery fire. We're also going to put 2 batteries over here. Reese and Page are going to fire into this flat ground for those Union soldiers that are coming out into this field. Now what's going to happen is Rhodes is going to try and line up attack. And his attack plan is rather simple. First of all, he's going to bring his men down in order. The first thing he's going to have is O'Neill's Alabama Brigade. That's Rhodes' old brigade, by the way. And he doesn't think Colonel O'Neill, former politician, attorney, fairly opinionated, shouldn't be commanding his brigade. In fact, he would recommend multiple other people to command his brigade, but nonetheless, O'Neill is in charge today. And his idea is that the Alabamans would be paired with some North Carolinians, commanded by Alfred Iverson, that they should attack into this position simultaneously. Now, that won't happen that way, best intent. Now, the way this is going to break down is O'Neill will actually advance across these fields just to your front, to my left. And as they do, they're going to run into a couple things. First of all, Union troops that had come on the field under John Robinson, his division, are over by the seminary. They were placed there as the reserve. They will build some temporary breastworks that will be a factor later on in the day in the defense of Seminary Ridge. These Confederate troops arriving from the north, Robinson will send one of his brigades, Baxter's brigade, up here. They're going to arrive in the position that we're going to head to. The other thing is the 11th Corps is coming on the field, effectively trying to connect the 1st Corps to the west with the 11th Corps to the north. The 45th New York is going to be down in there. They're going to kick out 4 companies of skirmishers. O'Neill will see this. He will go forward, and he will be repulsed with loss. And there was a lot of debate about how long this fight took. Some people on the high side say it took 30 minutes. Other people say it took about 15. Either way, the New Yorkers are going to capture some Alabamans in that barn. And we often refer to the Civil War as a war between brothers. The 45th is going to capture some Alabama soldiers in there. And for the first time since they arrived in the United States, the Schwartz brothers will meet again. One of them from Alabama, one of them from New York. They recognize each other right off and give each other a hug. The younger brother, sent back as a prisoner, would ultimately be freed by the Confederate attack. But it's only then that he learns that his older brother, Corporal Rudolph Schwartz of the 45th New York, has been killed by a shell. But literally, one soldier fighting for the North and one for the South, brothers, will meet in that barn on the afternoon of July 1st. Now, as we go into Baxter's position, what you will start to see is the tree line. Earlier this morning, we talked about Cutler's brigade would retreat back into the tree line. When Baxter's brigade comes north, they're going to take up a V-shaped formation that's almost going to be facing it. Some Union troops facing to the west, some of them facing to the north. Now, when Iverson goes forward and he gets repulsed, O'Neill gets repulsed, those North Carolinians will go forward. Commanded by Alfred Iverson, perhaps the least liked brigade commander in the Army of Northern Virginia. When he sends his men, they do not send any skirmishers out. Counter to every normal procedure. The other thing is we expect our brigadiers in the Civil War to lead from the front, to be conspicuous, just like those battle flags. Now, he doesn't go with them. He says, give them hell, boys, but he doesn't go with them. And effectively what's going to happen is Iverson's men are going to come across the field, and we're going to cross over this road here, and we'll get a good look at where they are, but we'll do it from Baxter's position. As Iverson's men come, John Robinson, active on the field, will ride down and take some of these Union regiments that have been facing north, and they're going to run up the ridge line, and they're going to join along this stone wall. And they're going to provide firepower. Now, unlike many other scenes in the American Civil War, these guys aren't waving their battle flag. They're actually down beneath this wall. So what's going to happen is, as Iverson's men come across this field, and we'll make a run for it here, And I'll tell you what, why don't we slime up here real quick, and that way we can show everybody. We get a great look back up at Oak Hill. You can imagine for the 12th Massachusetts, that's whose position we're in. They are looking at Confederates advancing across this field. They're down beneath this wall, just behind Gary. What's going to happen when they get about 80 to 100 yards away? All of a sudden, 1,500 Union soldiers are going to rise up, level their rifles, and deliver a volley. As many as 500 Confederates go down in that first volley. And you can see, looking out into that field, there's hardly any cover or concealment out there. Confederates will be shot down. You can see just a little bit of ripple off there to the south. And of course, for the 12th North Carolina, that'll be their saving grace, because everyone else literally gets annihilated. Gang, we have not talked about the peach orchard. We haven't talked about the wheat field or Pickett's charge. The largest percentage of loss of any Confederate brigade at Gettysburg happens in this field. Iverson's going to suffer 67% casualties. Now, for the Union soldiers that are here, Chris, you want to pick up the Union defense?
Yeah, I'll pick it up. Thanks, Doug. Doing a great job with the American Battlefield Trust. We have some other friends who are going to be joining us here. So, Gary, we're going to stop. They're trying to catch up with us. And just talk for a brief moment or two. Number one, I want to touch on something that Doug had said about Iverson. Iverson really is one of the most hated men in the Confederate Army. Whenever he's promoted to brigade command, in fact, there's a petition within his brigade of his officers, his junior officers, saying, we don't want this guy, can we bring in someone else? And then he says, okay, that's fine, but if any of you are up for promotion, I'm gonna block every promotion that goes through. And so this creates a ripple effect throughout this entire brigade. He doesn't like his line officers and field officers. They don't like him, so this is not a cohesive unit that comes out here. As they came out into this field, they will kind of swing down into this open area, and it's wide open in 1863. And as Doug described, Henry Baxter's brigade will rise up and fire out into this area. Baxter is not a trained soldier. In fact, he's been off to war since 1861, but has been wounded severely 3 separate times, including during the Riverine crossing at Fredericksburg on December the 11th, 1862, when he was shot through the chest and nearly killed. But Baxter is a soldier who's learned on the job, as is his division commander, a guy named John Robinson, perhaps the hairiest man in the entire hairy Army of the Potomac. He comes out here, he's a West Point dropout, but he is a guy who knows exactly how to wield soldiers on a battlefield. He will serve in the Army of the Potomac until May 8th, 1864, when his left knee is shattered by a ball at the Battle of Laurel Hill, the opening action of Spotsylvania Courthouse. But as the Confederates attack and are repulsed, more reinforcements are needed into this area. And one of those brigades that will come into this area is commanded by a guy named Gabriel Paul. Paul will move up from the seminary area about a mile to the south of us, where his men were putting together what was a barricade, and which will be very important to the story later on. And Paul, as he moves his men up into this area, will intermingle his men with Baxter's brigade. So we'll have a mix of 2 different brigades in here. Some of the guys will pull off and get a new ammunition, while others are going to man the line up here. But as the Confederates renew their assaults later in the day, we'll have men come down here from North Carolina commanded by Stephen Ramseur behind the camera, out into these fields in front of us, commanded by Junius Daniel, their first battle with Lee's army. Paul is going to be shot about 1.5 inches behind his right eyeball. And this Union brigade commander, Brigadier General, is shot there, and the bullet comes out his left eye. He falls to the ground. He's thought to be dead. He's not. Miraculously, he survives. But he is going to lose his eyesight. There's a picture from Matthew Brady's studio that shows his eyes actually sewn shut after this. He is also going to have a dull sense of smell after this and taste, and he's going to be basically, this is going to end his military career, although he retires in 1866. But Paul is an interesting story because over the next 20 or so years, his Gettysburg wound becomes worse and worse. He will, by the end of his life in the mid-1880s, suffer up to 6 seizures a day. And this is going to be a horrible way to go. And as we stand out here looking over what we know as one of the bloodiest fields at Gettysburg, where Iverson's men would have fallen, 500 of them, in a perfect line as if on parade, you have to question, what is that ripple effect of a loss? Is it better to lose that son outright? Is it better to have them come home and witness those wounds of war. One of the greatest fears of the greatest generation that Doug brought up was the fact that they weren't going to be killed, but they could be so maimed out on those battlefields in Europe and in the Pacific that they would be different men when they went home, and that would be a burden on their family. In fact, 40% of casualties in World War II were mentally related to battle fatigue. So as we start to look back here, and Paul will die in the 1880s, and there's a great epitaph telling about his death. Gabriel Paul, in his obituary, will say something along the lines of, from his wounds at Gettysburg, he died. So as we look at casualties, the 51,000 men who died here, or were killed, wounded, or missing here at Gettysburg, July 1st through 3rd, those casualties, those numbers, keep increasing over the decades to come. And it's something to consider whenever you talk about these families, these veterans, and what they're about to endure.
As we pass some of these units, of course, these are fairly storied ones. We're looking at the 12th Massachusetts, known as the Daniel Webster Regiment. All Boston Blue Bloods, arguably the top 1%ers in the United States, commanded by Fletcher Webster at the beginning of the war. He gets killed at Second Battle of Bull Run, but these would have been troops that had earned their spurs in the cornfield at Antietam, and now you can see while they are incredibly disciplined and effective on this battlefield. Even as we cross over, we're looking down through what they called the Grove. This was a grove of oak trees while they were here. And what's going to happen is you see some of the units. Remember, when Baxter first comes up, some of them are going to be angled to the north. The 13th Massachusetts is down there. Their color bearer is Sergeant Roland Morris. Supposedly the story is where that monument sits today is where Morris is killed. You can see the 104th New York. That was, oh, I just lost his name.
Dude.
Totally blew that one.
They're the Wadsworth Guards, I'll give you that.
Wadsworth Guards. So yeah, they're commanded by James Wadsworth at the beginning of the war. Remember, Wadsworth, the richest man in the Union Army. So the 104th New York battle flags were, of course, manufactured by Tiffany's, which is good work if you can get it, gang. So as we look down here, we're going to head back up towards the angle. When we think about the end of the day, that as Chris brought this out of when the Robert E. Lee will now show up on the field, he realizes with the troops coming in the west, the troops coming from the north, and even from the northeast, if we look just across the field coming out from behind that tree, you'll see a large radio tower. At the base of that is the old Harrisburg Road. We need to know Jubal Early, 6,500 Confederates are coming down there. Robert E. Lee, with the sweep of an eye, believes the Union Army's got about 20,000 men. In reality, it's probably closer to 16,000. And he believes for the men from the west, the men from the north, and the men from the northeast, he has numbers to bear, about 27,000. And that's how the afternoon attack will go. Now, we're going to talk about that later in the day, but when we think about the Confederate reconstituted attack, this would be Ramseur's brigade that will attack. It will shatter this position. And now, John Robinson's got to figure out, how do I get my brigade off of this ridgeline? He's going to go to the colonel of the 16th Maine, Colonel Tilton, and he goes, I want you to go out to where the intersection is today, and I need you to hold at all hazards. Tilton knows it's a bad deal. He only has 275 men. And nonetheless, Robinson said, you will hold at all cost. And so he's going to go down there. He will defend to buy time for the Union troops to get off this ridgeline. They will then eventually make a fighting retreat down this ridgeline almost until they get to the railroad cut. When surrounded almost again, his color bearer is going to go to him and say, are we really going to fight it out to the last? And Tilton will take his sword as symbol of command. He jams it in the ground and breaks it off at the hilt. Color bearer has his answer. He says, we shouldn't lose the colors, and Tilton agrees. So they tear up their colors and they hand pieces of their colors to all the individuals that are still fighting. So pieces of the 16th Maine battle flags go to Confederate prisons like Libby Prison in Richmond and Andersonville in Georgia. And during the dedication of the 16th Maine Monument, which we can see just down the line, that obelisk monument down there, when the speaker mentions the sacrifice of the 16th Maine, 3 of the veterans would get up out of their seats. They would walk up on the stage. When they all got up there, the speaker, now not knowing what's going on, they look at each other and nod, and then they each reach in their pocket and they pull out the piece of battle flag that they had been given on July 1st during the fighting to get this brigade back off. I said they started the day with 275. When they take their initial head count back on Cemetery Hill, they have 39. Which goes to the point that when we visit the battlefield, we should spend that we know how it's going to turn out. Because with each of these decisions these commanders make, they don't know what the results will be in the future.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more there, Doug. And I just wanted to add one thing about the story of Tilden and his sword. According to another account, he was about to surrender an Alabama soldier when he defiantly jammed that sword in the ground and broke it off so that the guy couldn't take it from him. So, you know, either way, it's a pretty epic story. Whichever one is the true one.
It is indeed. Thanks, Chris. Let's just take advantage of this great view from here, the place from which I watched the falling of the National Tower in 2000 or 2001 on July 3rd. It was great. I can see Barlow's Knoll from here. So again, coming up on Oak Hill and Oak Ridge is just a great experience. I want to say, first of all, hola, back to you, George or Jorge Perez. Or Paez. I see you on here a lot. I see someone cleaning their basement, somebody at work. You're some of our favorite people. We do really well during the day a lot of times. And the generosity of the person who supported us, Camp Sawyer. Thanks so much for that. With no further ado, I want to bring on a couple of friends of ours. You've already seen them. They're from the National Civil War Museum. This is Dane and Mike here. Dane, as always, what do you got?
So we have a set of shoulder boards for a captain. Now these are red. These are artillery shoulder boards, but they're for a soldier, an officer who was here with the 12th Massachusetts at Gettysburg. His name was Andrew J. Gary. He was a native of Maine, and he was 27 years old at the start of the war, a nailer, and he was living in Weymouth, Massachusetts. He enlisted as a sergeant in 1861, served with the 12th Massachusetts Company H from June 1861 till being mustered out in Boston in July 1864.
That's so, and Doug already mentioned this unit. They're right here on this ridge. We walked right by their monument, Dane.
Yeah, and Gary here would eventually serve with the 4th Massachusetts Heavy Artillery, and that's when he was wearing those shoulder boards there. So of course he was captain with the infantry here, became a captain with the artillery later on.
Okay, good. So you also have some other stuff from what I understand,
Yeah,
right?
we have a photograph of the position of the 104th New York. So here,
I'll hold it.
Okay, so this shows a flank marker, a position up on the hill. It looks like it's looking up the hill. This from the area below Mike here, and that's July 1st, 1863. So
Beautiful shot.
And it was mentioned, of course, the regiment was known as the Wadsworth Guard. We had a flank marker flag of that regiment here in 2015 about, and now we have that old historic photo, early photo of that area.
Full circle, cool. You have anything else with you, or are we good?
Well, we also have some documents related to the 90th Pennsylvania. An officer named John Durang, a native of Philadelphia, who was wounded here, and these documents were affidavits to get him a promotion as a captain in the Invalid Corps by a group of officers, including his Colonel Peter Lyle. They were all written in approximately from December 16th to December 19th, 1863. So same period as Lincoln was in town here for his immortal words. We have the final document is a December 1863 letter from Kelly's Ford, Virginia, written by Alfred Sellers, the major of the 90th Pennsylvania, a native of Plumsteadville, Bucks County in eastern Pennsylvania. He would receive the Medal of Honor for his heroics in saving the flank here of the 90th PA at Gettysburg and protecting the retreat of the 11th Corps.
Good. I think what we're really getting at here is that we, at the National Civil War Museum, they have stuff, north, south, black, white, male, female. They really have it covered there. I mean, when we just said we were going to come out, they had to make tough decisions as to what is the things they were going to bring with them on this. Now, before Chris grabs the stage here, and as we walk towards something I know a lot of y'all want to see, let me just say that, there's somebody put in the comments that we should tag team out and that we should slap our hands WWE style as we go in and out. And for some people watching, we're a little bit more irreverent than others. We want you to engage in the battlefield, with the battlefield, the way that you feel appropriate. There's no code of conduct out there. Sometimes we're reverent, sometimes we're irreverent. We want to encourage you all, as long as it's legal, to engage in the way with the battlefield that's most appropriate to you to honor the soldiers who were here. Chris?
Yeah, I just want to point out as we're going to keep walking along, Sarah's showing us John Cleveland Robinson, the man I always dubbed the hairiest man in a very hairy army. He's a New Yorker. This is his monument here on Oak Hill. Another monument that I want to talk about that we passed is to the 90th Pennsylvania. In fact, they have 3 major monuments here at Gettysburg, 2 on Cemetery Ridge, one in the northern part of it, one near the Pennsylvania Monument. But their more famous one sits here on the north side of Oak Ridge, and that is a tree. It looks like a tree that is an oak tree that was supposedly up here in 1863. And one of the stories that comes from the unit fighting here was that there was a mother bird who was up in this tree, and whenever a branch comes crashing down, her nest came down with it, and one of the soldiers, a corporal, supposedly climbed back up the tree under enemy fire and put it back up there. So as you come here, you'll see an oak tree standing there with no branches, but sitting in one of the stumps of a branch would be a small bird's nest, as well as all of the accoutrements of the 90th Pennsylvania soldier here. But my favorite portion, the little addition to it, is the flank markers. Both are tree stumps themselves to the right and left ends of their lines. So if you come along here, there are a lot of stories. The 88th Pennsylvania, who we just passed, and I'll have Sarah swing around here. She's doing a great job of dealing with us dancing. They have a marker out in the area of Iverson's Pits. So they have 2 markers, a main monument and then a marker just a few dozen yards ahead of their monument. The web's on Oak Ridge, and that's showing that they fired all of their ammunition. And Daniel Webster did not come up with the dictionary. He is a politician here in the U.S., part of the great triumvirate here in the U.S. But of course, our more famous stories will start to come into play here with monuments as we start to wrap up. 2 regiments that approached this area, the 97th New York, under command of Charles Wheelock, who has a fantastic story of losing his sword almost to Confederates. But a young lady named Carrie Sheeds hid it in her petticoats so that the Confederates could not take it. And then there was the story of the 11th Pennsylvania, which we're coming up on. Those 2 units approached this area through the woods in front of us and started engaging with the Confederates out in this area. But as you probably well know, with the 11th Pennsylvania, we'll visit their monument in a moment, they famously have the war dog Sally with them, which is one of the mascots on the Gettysburg battlefield. Not the only pet mascot on this battlefield. There are dogs in the Confederate Army that served with the Richmond Howitzers, who were known as Lee and Jackson. And the Louisiana Tigers always tried to steal Jackson from the Richmond Howitzers and finally succeeded at one point. There's also the dog Jack, who's with the 102nd Pennsylvania Infantry. But of course, Sally is out here with the 11th Pennsylvania, which is a regiment that is formed in western Pennsylvania largely. And this is their soldier standing atop Oak Ridge. You can see they're about to go into the ready position. They're looking out towards the enemy coming from the west. And as they get into that ready position, just about to go to the ready position, it'll be ready, aim, fire. That's about where they're going from the ready position into the aiming. And of course, on the front of it, and Sarah, we can get right up close, is Sally. And this is a story that stuck out to all of the soldiers. Think about all of the men that they went off to war with, who they lost. Battles from 1861 all the way up through the close of the war. But Sally, who is out here on Gettysburg's battlefield on July 1st, is left behind and for the next few days stays with the soldiers who are here along the battle line, who are killed and wounded with the 11th Pennsylvania. Whenever the Union retakes this portion of the battlefield, they find Sally out here. I think it's a member of the 13th Massachusetts who finds Sally, and she's returned to the regiment. But unfortunately for Sally, she will be killed in the closing months of the war at Hatcher's Run in February of 1865. But she adorns the monument here, laying at the foot of the soldier, a nondescript Union soldier, but a very close description of what Sally would have looked like. So it shows just how much this dog, this mascot, meant to the soldiers who went off to war. Little piece of normality from home here on the battlefield.
Chris, this is a great point. So the 11th Pennsylvania, known as the Bloody 11th, almost 1,890 men serve in the 11th Pennsylvania and go, holy cow, that's an anomaly. That's right, because when Abraham Lincoln would call for another 300,000 troops, governors got credit for raising new units, not refilling old ones. Except the 11th would send men back home to recruit men to serve in the 11th. Chris did a great job about telling about Sally. Supposedly in time of battle, Sally would take her position at the end of the line and bark as loud as we could because they all knew Sally didn't like 3 things: women, Democrats, and rebels. And so if you were a boy and a long way from home, I think maybe you think that's true. But in reality, that was a little touch of home, and certainly the idea that they knew of her fidelity on this battlefield. Because remember, when they retreat off this line, Sally doesn't keep up, and she doesn't know where they're going, but she knows where they've been. So the idea that she comes out here and keeps silent vigil over all the mortally wounded and killed until the rest of the troops shows up, that obviously made an impact on all those soldiers and why they chose to put her at the base of their monument.
And what strikes me as we're about to close up, Sarah, I'm going to have you come over closer to me. Number one, I have the hot spot. Don't go too far from me. Number two, all the battle honors here for the 11th. It shows just why Doug said they earned that nom de guerre, the Bloody 11th. But I would like to point out for you American Battlefield Trust members, we have helped to save land at Cedar Mountain, Bull Run. Chantilly is actually where the battlefield preservation movement started, the modern battlefield preservation movement. South Mountain, Antietam, Gettysburg, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville Wilderness. You just go down here, and this is a list of the good work of the members of the American Battlefield Trust, helping to preserve the land where the Bloody 11th and where Sally fought in 1861 all the way up to the close here at Appomattox, though she is killed in the closing months of the war, unfortunately for the soldiers of the 11th. But to close off, looking out over here, and I'll turn it over to you, Gary, in a moment, if you would have looked out into these fields on the evening of July 1st, 1863, you would have seen a perfect dress line. It would not have been standing and living soldiers. That would have been Iverson's men mixed along with some of the men of Junius Daniels' North Carolina Brigade. The only thing that will save the 4th Regiment in Iverson's brigade, there are 4 regiments in this brigade, is that small ripple of land. They are just beyond that small ripple of land, and that is what is going to protect them from the ferocity of the fire here, and then from Union units sallying out to go out, capture battle flags, capture men, and bring in the wounded. And this is why it's so important for the work of the American Battlefield Trust to bring you out to places like this. And of course, I think it's the story of the 20th North Carolina's flag is captured somewhere out in this area, ripped in half during the battle. One man will keep it from the north, one man from the south will keep it, and as the story goes, 50 years later when the two sides come back together here for the Great Reunion, one man has half of that flag, the other has the other half, and they put the flag of the 20th back together. I think it was the 20th North Carolina's flag that happened with, or the 23rd. There's a lot of North Carolina regiments out here, and we're not working with notes. So there's a lot of different stories out here, and we're just touching the tip of this iceberg. So we encourage you to come out here, check out all the layers of history. There was once an airport out here that flew stunt shows and all kinds of different things. It trained World War II pilots. There were pilot training courses out here. There was so much more to learn here about Gettysburg. So check out our YouTube channel at the American Battlefield Trust YouTube channel. Go over to battlefields.org, read our articles, learn more about what we do, and hopefully you'll become a member or make sure that you at least know what we do to preserve, educate, and inspire Americans about our 3 wars that we principally cover: the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and the War of 1812.
Thanks so much, Chris. 2 more thank yous to BG for your generosity and Tim York for your outstanding generosity in supporting us. And for everybody who's watching, I saw us over 400 people at one time, and that's just really just great. So thank you for watching. We're going to be live again as possible throughout the anniversary. We really appreciate your support. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate you sharing this with your friends, and we look forward to more on the battlefield. For now, thanks for supporting battlefield education and preservation.